Hello. For tonight's Grizzly Tale, I'm going to read you a story from Grizzly Tales for Gruesome Kids. These are cautionary tales that I wrote for lovers of squeam. Tonight's story is called The Wooden Hill. The boy's name was Jack. Jack was bored. He wanted his mum to read him a bedtime story, but she was busy reading her newspaper. "Mum," said Jack, lying across the sofa and putting his head in her lap, "what are you reading?" His mum ignored him. From where he was lying, Jack could see right up her nose. He reached up and stuck his finger in her left nostril. "You've got long black hairs in your nose," he said. "What is the matter with you, Jack?" she snapped, leaping up with the pain and plonking Jack off her lap onto the floor. "Will you read me a story?" said Jack. "Later," said his mum, "when I finish the crossword." Jack rolled onto his back and sighed deeply. "She's a real old dragon, my mum," he thought, feeling frightfully sorry for himself. As a matter of fact, he could just imagine her as a dragon, green spiky hair, wings tucked away under her cardigan, teeth ready sharpened to bite his head off. He wouldn't want her to kiss him good night, though. Ooh, she'd burn his lips off. Jack snorted and laughed out loud. "Jack, please, I'm trying to concentrate, but I want a book." "Well, then go upstairs and get one," said his mum. "But you've got longer legs," whined Jack. "Mine are much shorter and get tired. You do it." Jack's mum put her paper down and looked at him wearily. "Jack, you are nearly 5 years old. Don't be silly. If you want me to read you a book, you can go and get one from your bedroom." And that was her final word. The real reason that Jack did not want to go upstairs by himself was simple. He was afraid of the dark. It was too spooky. He had tried it once before, but he hadn't made it past the umbrella stand in the hall. No, he wouldn't do it. His mum would have to go for him. He tried to attract her attention by tapping his foot against the coffee table in an annoying sort of way, but she didn't even blink. He rolled up bits of carpet fluff into cannonballs and fired them at the cat, who was asleep in front of the fire. The first ball hit the cat squarely on the ear. She leapt up, caught her tail in the flames, and screeched out of the room in search of a nice cool saucer of milk in which to soothe it. Still no reaction from his mum. So Jack crawled around to the back of the sofa and sprang lion-like onto her shoulders. "Boo!" he shouted. This did get a reaction. Jack was removed from the sitting room by the seat of his pyjamas and dumped unceremoniously on the cold marble floor in the hall. "When you have found a book, you may come back in," said his mum, and she disappeared back into the sitting room, shutting the door firmly behind her. "Oh dear," said Jack after a long pause. The only light in the hall came from the street lamp outside, which cast a deep red shadow over one wall. The shadow flickered as something flew in front of the light. Jack ducked down behind the telephone table and shut his eyes. "Oh dear," he said again. "I don't like bats." Jack had spent too much time hiding and too little time looking. They weren't bats at all. They were moths. When he had summoned up enough courage, Jack tiptoed to the bottom of the vast staircase. It spiralled upwards towards a large black hole at the top of the house. The white banisters stood out in the dark, and twisting as they did, round and round in ever-decreasing circles, they looked to Jack like a giant rib cage. "I'm not scared," he whispered to himself. He didn't want to speak too loud in case the Bogey Man heard him. Not that he believed in the Bogey Man. Of course he didn't. It was just that if the Bogey Man did exist and was hiding behind the bathroom door waiting to pounce, Jack didn't want to annoy him, because the biggest insult you can pay the Bogey Man is to say you're not frightened of him. Frightening children half to death is his job, you see. Jack started to climb the stairs. He took the first 3 steps very slowly, keeping his left hand in front of his eyes and feeling his way along the banister rail with his right. Once he had reached the 4th step, he was starting to feel more confident. Well, this was easy. He was in his own house, his mother was downstairs. It was only going to take him a minute or so to reach his room, and what was that noise? He stopped dead. Something was groaning underneath the staircase. He took another step and froze with terror. There it was again. He couldn't be sure that it was definitely a groan. I mean, it could have been a rumbling sound, the sort his tummy made when he got home from school and was waiting for lunch. That was it! His worst nightmare! It was a hungry troll burrowing up through the floorboards to make a meal out of him. He'd read about trolls. They liked the taste of little boys, especially when they were wearing pyjamas, and now there was one living under the stairs in his house. He wanted to call out to his mum, but he knew that she wouldn't hear him. There was only one thing to do: run as fast as he could to his parents' bedroom and hope the troll wouldn't follow. He gritted his teeth, pulled up his pyjama bottoms so as not to trip over them, and set off up the last few steps to the landing. The troll didn't make a sound to start with until Jack stumbled on a loose floorboard. Oh, you should have heard the groan that it let out then. It made the hairs on the back of Jack's neck stick out like porcupine needles. He shot up the last few remaining steps like a rocket, dived into his parents' bedroom, and slammed the door behind him. The bedroom smelt familiar in that comforting way that all parents' bedrooms do. Jack sat with his back against the door and heaved a huge sigh of relief. "Trolls," he said to himself. "Honestly, Jack, what will you dream up next? Ghosts?" He laughed at his own stupidity. "Pull yourself together. That groaning noise was probably just squeaky floorboards." A cold wind blew gently across his face as he stood up to leave. He looked over to the far corner of the room where the wind had come from. Through the darkness, he could just make out a swirling shape that was moving across the floor towards him. "A ghost!" he squealed. He stood transfixed by this terrifying apparition. The shape was floating across the carpet, twisting and flapping like an enormous winged snake. He grabbed hold of the door handle and pulled it for all he was worth. It wouldn't open. He could feel the velvety wings of the serpent brushing against his back. He tugged at the handle again. This time the door opened, and Jack tumbled out of the room just as the wind dropped, and the curtain fell back into its normal position in front of the open window. Jack was a nervous wreck. The idea of his mum reading a bedtime story to him was becoming less and less attractive. He had one more flight of stairs to climb before he reached his own bedroom, and he had serious doubts about ever making it alive. The bathroom stood between him and the foot of the stairs to the loft. The bathroom meant only one thing to Jack: the Bogey Man. He knew exactly what the Bogey Man looked like. He was very tall and fantastically gooey. So gooey, in fact, that he left a trail of slime behind him wherever he went. His hair was made out of green pondweed, and he had lily pads instead of feet. What he actually did to children, Jack was not entirely sure, but he had a notion that he liked to slip into their clothes in the middle of the night, so that they were all wet and cold when they put them on in the morning. Jack edged along the wall outside the bathroom, trying to be as quiet as he possibly could. He held his breath and ducked down as he passed the door, so that the Bogey Man couldn't see him, even if he was spying on Jack through the keyhole. Jack knew that the Bogey Man was in there. He could hear that all too familiar dripping sound that kept him awake most nights and made him sleep with his head under his pillow. It was the slime dripping off the Bogey Man's cape onto the linoleum floor. Jack took his next breath when he reached the half landing on the way up to the loft. The worst was over. He had successfully escaped the grasp of the Bogey Man, and all that stood now between him and the safety of his bedroom was one short flight of stairs. And the fire monster! The fire monster! How could he have forgotten about the fire monster? The fire monster slept outside Jack's bedroom. For 2 years it had been scratching at Jack's door in the middle of the night, begging to be let in, but Jack had never opened the door. The monster pretended to be lonely, whimpering pathetically about how cold it was outside on the landing, and could it come in to warm itself in Jack's bed. But Jack was wise to the monster's tricks. He knew that all it really wanted to do was to roast him with its fiery breath until he was as pink as a marshmallow. 2 red eyes stared at Jack over the top of the staircase. A dreadful smell of scorched fur surrounded the fire monster's body as it lay sleepily on guard outside the bedroom door. Jack knew that he only had one chance. He would have to fight the monster now before it woke up. He lunged forward and grasped its matted fur with both hands. The monster twisted in his hands and lashed out with its sharp claws. Jack rolled the monster over onto its back and tried to pin its legs down, but the monster was too quick for him. In a flash, the cat sprung from Jack's clutches and ran off down the stairs, dragging its scorched tail behind it. Jack fell through his bedroom door, clambered onto a box of bricks, and switched the light on. He had made it. 30 seconds later, Jack's mum heard the most peculiar noise. It sounded like a herd of elephants on roller skates charging downstairs. She barely had time to put her newspaper down before Jack flew into the room at 100 miles an hour and buried his head in the pillows on the sofa. "Did you get a book?" she said. Jack kept his head hidden and waved his treasured prize in the air. His mum took the book from him. "There, you see," she said. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" Jack came out from under the pillows and snuggled up close to his mum. "Now, what have you bought for me to read?" Jack stuck his thumb in his mouth. He liked a good bedtime story, and he was looking forward to this one. "Dracula," said Jack. "It's my favourite."